Hello and welcome. In this video, we're going to demonstrate our Meadow to QuickBooks Online Connector, and we're going to jump into QuickBooks and show you exactly what transactions we're creating. First, I'd like to go over the data that we're getting from Meadow. In our connector, we're using probably the same data that you're using today to do these steps manually. We have you go into Meadow, download the reports, save them as Excel documents, and then those Excel documents become the source data. Let's go ahead and take a peek in Meadow. When we go to Meadow, we're going to go into the reports section. We're going to scroll down and we're going to have you download the orders report, the returns report, and the purchase orders report. Those are the three source files that we use for the connector. So you're going to go ahead and you're going to run those reports. You're going to select your start date and your end date for the activity that you want to get into QuickBooks, and then you're going to generate and download those documents. Once your spreadsheets have been downloaded, you'll go into the connector, and here in the connector you have the option of running receipts or bills or both. The receipts button is going to create invoices and payments over in QuickBooks, along with a cost of goods sold journal entry that I'll show you here in a moment. The other option is to run your create bills, which is going to process that purchase order spreadsheet. Some folks choose to do bill processing in a different fashion, so they don't click that button, and that's option is completely up to you. When you go to run the connector, you can choose to either run one of the buttons at a time, or you can select the box down at the bottom and process both buttons at the same time, and the connector will go ahead and process your orders and order returns, and once it's completed that process, it will turn around and create bills based on that purchase order spreadsheet. The connector does also keep track of the last time you processed activity. So here we can see activity for sales has been processed as of 5/23, and purchase orders were processed up through the month of May. So when the connector runs, it's going to look at those spreadsheets that you've downloaded. It's going to look at the data inside those spreadsheets, and if anything is dated after these dates, it will go ahead and process that and create that activity over in QuickBooks. And once it's processed a day successfully, it's going to go ahead and update this last process date. This allows you to import activity either on a day-by-day basis, a week-by-week basis, a month-by-month basis. It's completely up to you on how you want to import that data and in what chunk size you want to process that info. Once you click these buttons, again, it's going to go off and it's going to create that information, and we're going to jump over in QuickBooks here real quick and take a peek at exactly what activity is getting created. Now, I did mention that the activity is getting created on a daily summary basis. So you are going to get an invoice for every day's activity along with the associated payments with those. And when we do that summary entry, we are in fact bringing that data in by Meadow product type. So it doesn't mean that you have to track your income by each individual type, but you do have the option to do so. And the way we do that is with non-inventory items over in QuickBooks. So we have you create a non-inventory item for each one of your item types in Meadow, and you can get that information from Meadow to make sure that you create an item for each one of those types that are over there. And when we create that item, we come in, and this is where you have the control over your income account. And here we can see I have beverage set up, and my income account is an income account, but it also has I have a sub account set up for beverage. So whenever that invoice gets created and I've sold beverages in a day, the invoice is going to see the beverage item, and it's going to go ahead and hit the beverage account. So we have you set up a non-inventory item for each one of those types, and we also have you create a couple service items, and we'll go over those when we look at the settings. But we have things for if you want to break out your returns, if you want to break out discounts. We do have you create a service item for each one of the taxes that you work with. So if you have a state tax and a city tax, both of those can be created, and again, you're going to dictate where the dollars go based on the accounts that are set up on each one of those items. Now we can take a look at the invoice. So here's an invoice for a single day's activity. Again, remember, we are creating one invoice per day. So if we look at the invoice, we can see that here are each one of the product categories that we sold on this day, and we get a subtotal. And I happen to have my options set up in the connector to separate out my discounts and my returns so that we see those here below the subtotal. And then we do have three separate taxes that are being processed here at this dispensary, and those are identified here. And again, those dollars are isolated by setting up the GL account at the item level. So here we can see our total for the day. And here at the top, we can see that we had 2 payments that we created that were associated with this invoice and for this day. And if we take a look at those, we can see that we have 1 payment for roughly half of what our daily sales were, and that is going into undeposited funds. And again, this is a item that we control over in the connector settings, and I'll show you here in just a moment. And again, we can come back into that invoice and we can look at the same second payment, and here we go. And again, the GL account that's controlled, we can see that it's applied to that invoice. That's a real quick hit on how the sales activity is brought in. The other transaction that's created at the same time as the invoice and the payments is a cost of goods sold journal entry. Here we can see that we're hitting a cost of goods sold, and it's a sub account that we're hitting, and we've created a sub account for each one of the items that are in QuickBooks, each one of the item types over in Meadow. And so we're hitting that pre-roll account, and we also have our inventory asset account broken out by category. So here we're reducing the asset for the pre-roll sub account, and we're increasing our cost of goods sold. Here we can see that it's just hitting cost of goods sold, and it's not hitting cost of goods sold flour. And we did that for demo purposes here, so you can see you don't have to have sub accounts set up, but if you do, they're utilized. So the program is looking, we do prompt you for your top level asset account, your top level cost of goods sold account, and then if you have sub accounts named after the product types, we will use those sub accounts. So they do have to be named. The sub accounts do have to be named exactly the same as the product type is in Meadow for that piece to work at this time. So again, we do have a lot of folks who won't break out their inventory assets, but they do like breaking apart their cost of goods sold so they can see that over on the P&L by category. So those are the three transactions, that are created when we hit that receipts button over in the connector. The last bit that is created are vendor bills. We do get 1 bill per PO. We're not doing a summary, 1 bill for multiple purchase orders. This is one-to-one relationship there, but I do want to point out that we are doing it at a summary level for the product type. So if we bought a whole lot of cartridges from this one vendor on this 1 bill, we're only going to see cartridges once, and it's going to go ahead and total that for us and then hit the appropriate inventory asset account. We are also tracking those excise taxes, and those do come in as expense lines on the bill. And again, you get to dictate where those dollars go. You get to specify that GL account over in the configuration of the connector itself. And again, we'll show that to you here in just a second. So that's really all the activity that's getting created in QuickBooks. Again, we're using the bill, the purchase order spreadsheet that you get out of Meadow. We're using the orders and the order returns for the receipts. And again, with a push of a button, it gets processed and created over here on the QuickBooks side. Now let's jump in and take a look at the connector settings. The first setting we have is our shared folder. This is where we can save the settings file so that all users can access it. So if there are multiple users on multiple computers that all have access to the same network, these settings can be saved and used by everybody. That way, when the settings are saved, we don't have to go through the setup again. And if something is changed down the road, it will affect all users that are pointing to the same directory. The next section is the QB files list. This is where you can map an unlimited number of QuickBooks Online files. So if you have multiple dispensaries, all that data can go into one QuickBooks file and be separated by class. It can just all go into the one file, or you can put multiple dispensaries into individual QuickBooks files, a combination of whatever works for you. We try to make this as dynamic as possible. The next section we have is the actual entity or dispensary setup. This is where you're going to go through this setup for each physical dispensary that you have a login for over on the Meadow side. So when you download those Meadow reports, this is the area that's going to tell us how to process each one of those. And we start that by identifying the Meadow ID. So this ID is going to be at the beginning of each one of those spreadsheets that you export. And again, this is how we dictate which set of Meadow data goes into which QuickBooks file, because we're able to map the Meadow ID here and the QuickBooks file over here. And again, if you select the same QuickBooks file for multiple dispensaries and you want to break those out by class, those can be set here. And again, that will allow you to get that P&L by class and just kind of separate the financials, even though the dispensary data is all going into the same QuickBooks file. This shared folder directory, this is where we're saving those Meadow reports, and this tells the program where to go look for those so that it can process each one. We do have a couple settings over here real quick. The line discounts with the sales amount. Basically, if there are line discounts given over in Meadow, we can apply that to the sales number that we saw in the invoice. So the discounts would not be included in the subtotal. So we wouldn't be getting a gross sales. We'd be getting more of a net sales. We can also indicate here if we want the cost of goods sold to be broken out by product type. So when we looked at that cost of goods journal entry, this is what indicated that we wanted to break that out and see that across each product type. Down on the bottom here, these sales receipt settings, this is going to dictate how the invoice and the payments get set up over in QuickBooks. We do have you pick a customer, so all those transactions are going to go in as the same customer. And then we have settings for loyalties, fees, credits, and adjustments that might appear at the line level, and then also the discounts item. So if you have line discounts and you chose up here to put those line discounts up with the sales amount and reduce your sales by those discounts, this setting here is going to dictate whether that gets separated or not. And this discounts down here really relates to not only what item is going to be used if you do choose to break those out, but also if you have a transaction level discount, this is going to be the item that's going to use. We do have an offset here. This is typically used if there's some sort of a rounding discrepancy. We don't see that too terribly often. And then here's where we dictate that inventory asset and cost of goods sold top level accounts that we're going to use. And then again, we go looking for those sub accounts to match the item type if you have those set up. And then lastly, you can indicate whether or not you want to break out those returns. And if you do, what item do you want to use in QuickBooks? And then that service item is going to be what dictates the GL account that's going to be utilized. We do have two separate sections for payment mapping and tax item mapping. And in here, this just lists the payment methods that you use, and we did try to make it a little bit easier so you don't necessarily have to know exactly what they are to type them in. You can point to an order spreadsheet, and we'll process through that order spreadsheet to see which payment methods have been utilized by the dispensary, and then you can come in and map those. The first column for mapping is the QuickBooks payment method, and this really just identifies the payment method over in QuickBooks. It really doesn't have an impact on anything, just helps you be able to quickly identify which payment amount goes with which payment method that was used. This next column is your deposit to account. This allows you to basically point each payment method to a different account over in QuickBooks. So if you want your cash to go into a main vault account, but you want your debit transactions to go to undeposited funds or maybe straight into the bank account, this is where you would identify that GL account to be used. The last two columns, they're a little bit more confusing than most of the other settings, and this really comes into play if you have a net negative payment method. So a real not so fantastic example, but if you were receiving a lot of debit card payment methods and you're giving the change due in cash, and then you didn't have a whole lot of cash sales that day, there could potentially be a negative cash once you finished for the day. And since QuickBooks doesn't really allow us to do that, we do create a journal entry and all the transactions necessary to make all those net out. But again, the chances of not receiving more cash in than we put out is quite far-fetched, I believe. But again, we're doing this just because it could potentially happen, and we don't want there to be any errors, any issues with the financials. So we ask you to set those two items up, and again, just in the rare case that they do happen. The final section is the tax mapping. So what we do ask, we do help you by doing the same thing we did on the payments. Is we'll process a report that you downloaded, and we'll pick through that and pull out the different payment methods. For this, we actually do have you download a tax report out of Meadow if you choose to, and then that's what we process to pick out those taxes that are set up in Meadow. You don't have to go that route. You can manually enter them here, but because we're looking for an exact match, we just find it easier if we pick through that tax report and then display the different methods that are used, and then you can turn around and map the QuickBooks tax item. And here you can see I've just mapped everything as sales tax payable. So over in QuickBooks, when we saw that invoice, the reason we saw sales tax payable, and sales tax payable is because that's how I've mapped each one of the taxes, so it doesn't really break it out over on the invoice too well. It does break it out by the different ones, but we just can't tell which ones they are over there. And then we have the bills and credits tab. This is where you assign your accounts payable account and then the excise cost of goods sold GL account. The one last thing I didn't point out over on the sales receipts is our bill processing date. So this is the last day that we created bills in QuickBooks based on the reports that had been downloaded and processed. And the same thing goes over here for the sales receipts. This is the last day that was processed without error. We can come in here and change that if you have an issue with some processing. Maybe there was a week's worth of data that just something didn't go in right and you need to reprocess it. You could go and delete that activity in QuickBooks, come over here, reset the date back to the last good date that was processed, re-download or reprocess the reports by putting them into the folder that's specified above, and then when you push the button over on the main screen, it will actually start from this date that we've set it back to, again just allowing you to a little more easily reprocess activity if needed. So that's really the down and dirty of what the Meadow to QuickBooks Online Connector does. I hope this was informative, and if you do have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to do a one-on-one demo with you and answer any questions you might have. And again, when you do decide to sign up, we do work with you one-on-one to make sure everything is set up and configured properly, and we'll even process a couple days worth of activity for you. Thank you very much and have a great day.